if the system that is meant to be helping children is something that we have to navigate, then that to me indicates a very broken system.
Yeah, it makes total sense.
Oh, yes.
Trust in your knowledge of the child. You are with this child 10 hours a day, 5 days a week.
I love that.
There is no inherently inferior or superior way of being. We just are. We are just what we are. And it's about understanding ourselves holistically.
I agree.
Yeah, totally agree.
Hello!
And welcome to another episode number 8 of the Tiny Chair Pod. Doing
Already?
pretty well, Julia. They haven't cancelled us yet.
No, time flies, doesn't it, when you're having fun?
Oh yeah, and this week we're talking to Kerry Murphy. I can't wait. What about you?
I'm so excited. Kerry Murphy is an amazing advocate of children and adults in the sector. She supports disability and neurodivergent affirming practice, and I cannot wait to get talking to her.
It's going to be a good one. It's going to be hard for your challenge of being an active participant in the podcast and not just listening.
I know. Our guest last week, Tom, did point out that I do sometimes forget that I'm actually on a podcast because I'm just so excited to talk to the guests. But what can I say? I just love talking about the early years, and I'm doing it now, so we should probably move swiftly on.
Moving on. We are wearing our summariest shirts for those of you who watch. I thought I was coming with quite a creative shirt this week, and then I walk into the studio and Julia's there, and it would take about half an hour to describe that shirt, wouldn't it?
It's very colourful. Yeah. But Matt, why are we wearing these colourful shirts?
Well, we are about to, both of us, go on a various little holidays, and so we are actually going to take a few weeks off, but do not fear, we will be back in August. So this is going to be our last episode for a few weeks, but it's not over. They haven't cancelled us yet. Episode 9 will be hitting Spotify and YouTube and Apple Music and all those places in August time. So don't fear, we won't be gone too long.
Absolutely. And how can they get in touch with us in the meantime?
Good question. So in the meantime, we'd love to hear from you over on our email at tinychairpod@family.co.uk. That's tinychairpod@family.co.uk. We want questions. We want guest suggestions. We want nice feedback. I guess you could send nasty feedback, but
Don't send nasty feedback.
We don't want to hear it. And of course, as ever, if you can leave us a review and tell your friends about it, that would be great. Should we get started? Should we go and chat to Kerry?
Yes, finally. Yes.
Woohoo! Let's go.
Let's go. Matthew, could you please introduce our guest?
I'm very excited to do so. So, for those of you who don't know her, Kerry Murphy is an early childhood specialist. Currently a lecturer at in early childhood and S.H.A.R.E at Goldsmiths University. As Julia mentioned, she specialises in neurodiversity and disability-affirming practice, improving inclusion, understanding, and promoting a celebratory framework of assessment and support, which we all love. We all love a celebratory framework, don't we?
We do.
She's a 19-year veteran of the early years, consultant, author, has delivered seminars, training for early years setting, local authorities, and for us here at Family. That was a good app, wasn't it? The family sessions with Kerry.
It was
we still
amazing.
get loads of good views on that. She's currently working on a doctorate in the pathologisation of play and child development in neurodivergent children, which we're definitely going to get into, but has made time, despite all of this, to come and speak to us on the Tiny Chair Pod. And despite the stifling heat currently in the UK, Kerry, it's very lovely to have you with us. Welcome to the Tiny Chair.
Welcome.
Hello, thank you for inviting me, and I am loving the pattern clash today in your
nice.
Thank you so much.
It's like me, Julia, and your background wall. That is, there's an adjacency between the three.
We're creating a lot of visual noise.
I love it though. It's very classic. Is it a William Morris?
It is, yeah. Strawberry.
Oh,
Fields.
Julia!
Okay.
Good work. That was
She
nice.
knows a little bit about it. I'm just,
So,
you know.
what's becoming a slightly common Tiny Chair theme? What did we get wrong in the intro, Kerry? Did we miss anything important?
I think I'm probably on 22 years now in early childhood because I have aged since I last did that bio.
Wow.
And I do work at Goldsmiths, but as an associate lecturer, and I now have joined a local authority since January, and they have asked me to join their team to develop neurodiversity affirming practice. So
How are you finding that switch away from sort of more on the academic side and more into working with an early, like a local authority on the ground?
I miss lecturing so much. I hated everything else about working in a university other than actually like being with the students and like getting to actually teach and collaborate and to kind of cause trouble. So I loved that bit, but the politics of university environments was difficult. And so moving to local authority, it's a transition. Like there's loads of positive things, but I feel like I've moved into a environment in which I often am criticising. Like I'm often criticising local
Yeah.
authorities and
Right.
how they run SEN systems. So it's just finding my place there. But yeah, I'm enjoying it. I'm up for the challenge, and I'm in a team that really welcomes progress and change and wants to shift. So it's really fun, I think.
Could you imagine what that would be like, Julia, being in a team that welcomes change? And
No, Matthew, you're famously rigid.
all right, you kick us off with the first question.
Yes, so I would like to start with a little exercise we call Early Years Icks. If you've ever listened to the podcast before, it's basically just something that makes you go about the early years. Are you familiar with an ick?
I am, yes.
I would love to hear your early years ick then.
This is one of those things where I've got several, so I'm trying to think which is the one that annoys me the most, or which gives me the
hit
biggest
us up with all
ick.
of them.
So I suppose the thing that first comes to mind is a big ick for me, given that I work in, and I'm going to air quote SEN throughout this whole conversation, but the biggest ick for me is people who say that change can't happen because we must navigate the system. And that's a big ick for me, because I'm like, well, if we don't disrupt the system, if we don't dismantle it, if we don't challenge all the ways in which neurodivergent and disabled children are dehumanized, like which generation or who will do it? So I think this compliance to navigate the system, it really does give me the ick, although I entirely also understand it. So it's not necessarily a criticism to early years educators, it's a criticism to the system that they require that of early years educators.
And maybe there's a balance of like, you need the people who are going to try and find a way to navigate the system, but also you need people to push against the idea that there is a system in the first place, right? And that balance might actually get us progress.
Yeah, I think you can do both things at the same time. But what I often find is people will often come up to me at training events and things and say like, oh, these ideas are so exciting and they'd really make a difference, but we have to navigate the system. And it's like, if the system that is meant to be helping children is something that we have to navigate, then that to me indicates a very broken system.
Yes.
And so, yeah, it gets me into a lot of trouble speaking openly about that. But I think we do have to have honest conversations. And I suppose the other big ick for me, and it would be no surprise to anybody, is this idea of standardising early childhood, or thinking that we can age stage children or score them how special educational needs they are. All that type of stuff really, for me, completely contradicts the principle of the unique child. And so, yeah, they're the things that give me the ick and that I feel compelled to speak on as much as
Good
I
icks.
possibly can.
Yeah, very good icks.
Very good icks.
I agree so much about this, like, how special needs, again, you know, are you? And I think going back to navigating the system, what you hear so often from parents of children who are neurodivergent or disabled in the UK is that they're having to almost exaggerate,
yeah.
maybe it's a bit unfair, but they're having to really say, oh, it's so hard, it's so awful for my child, in order to get any sort of support, which is such an injustice to this child who's just existing, that they're having to be described in these terms just to get any sort of support.
We deal with it in some of the assessment work that we've historically done with family. Like when the EYFS changes came in, one of the big challenges was like the more tracking-led approach that had historically been how we handled things in our system. People agreed it was the wrong way of doing things, and they were really happy with our approach. But they were saying, well, when it comes to SEND, I need to be proving at some kind of regular cadence some sort of lack of something in order to get access to the funding. So I need to sort of do this paperwork over. And that, to me, I think, back to your point around navigating a broken system.
Yeah. We shouldn't having to be going to the local authority and being like, but look how bad they are. Like, this is a horrendous way to describe children.
Sorry to interrupt, but local authorities shouldn't be requiring that of people either. Like, I always do this anecdote when I'm doing training of, like when I was a consultant previously, because a lot of the things I criticise I've done. So the reason I criticise them is because I realised that actually I was in a position of privilege, and what I was doing was going out to early childhood settings and giving absolutely horrific advice. So I was upholding that system. And I used to always say to early years educators and parents and carers, which I'm now mortified by, describe your child on their worst day. Like, what's their worst day? And then we'll get some funding. And how are we meant to cultivate self-efficacy, self-belief? What stories are we telling parents about their children when we only ask them to speak about their worst days? And so for me now, what I want to know is, tell me about your best day. Tell me about what makes it a best day. And yes, there might be risks to that, but I really do believe that these reframes to like asset-based approaches, like just bring a bit more joy to our lives. Like SEND and neurodivergence and disability doesn't need to be like this crisis system. We can actually celebrate like the good quality of life of neurodivergent and disabled children, but it's now almost like mutually exclusive with suffering, deficits, impairments, and crisis. And it's like, oh no, this is not the world I want to live in.
I want to move on, but I really want to come in on that as well, because I find, one, that's a much better approach, because if you're saying describe your child on their best day, you're therefore describing all of the things that made it a good day. Well, we had a good morning, and this and this and this happened, which allowed them to have that good time. So you're by doing that, putting all of those things in place. This is what supported them. This is what made them happy. This is what made it nice. Brilliant. But also, I find so much of the description of especially being a parent of a neurodivergent child is centered around this idea that like we need to expose what it's really like. And I disagree with that, because it's always negative. And it is hard. Like, I'm a parent of a neurodivergent child. It can be hard, but being a parent is hard. Good luck coming up. Yeah. There are good and bad times, and being a parent is work and it's hard. But to have this whole narrative of like, oh, people should know, it just makes it sound awful. And I'm like, it's not. It's really not. You can't have this thing where neurodivergence and disability, like you say, is synonymous with difficulty and suffering, because it's not. Like, yeah. Anyway, I'll hop off my soapbox. Also, don't apologise for interrupting.
No,
you are the guest.
Point.
You're supposed to be talking. If anything, you should do it more, because otherwise I'll henceforth.
But I tell you what we're going to do, Kerry. We're going to jump into a little quick fire round to get to know you a bit better before we jump into the meat of the interview. So my first question on this quick fire round is, aside from early years, if I was to ask you to give us an impromptu speech with not much preparation, like a 10-minute TED talk, let's say, what would be the topic that you would choose to talk about?
Oh gosh, this is a multi-answer. So I'm thinking Moomins, Japanese stationery, Studio Ghibli. So those are the things that I most often speak about in my everyday life.
Oh, I love it.
The podcast is about to take a thematic turn. I want to hear more about Moomins.
My partner is Finnish, and so I've been learning a little bit of Finnish through watching Moomin. Yeah. It's good stuff. It's also a really complex and beautiful... It's complex in a way a lot of UK-focused children's TV is not, which I really love.
Yeah, and it addresses, like, I find a lot of it kind of rooted in existentialism. Like Tove wasn't afraid to talk about, like, politics with children. She was philosophical. Like, she was honest. I think that she had elements of, like, dark humour. And it, like... if I'm feeling down or I'm feeling a bit aimless, I have this book that is full of kind of like Moomin philosophies, and that's where I go. And there's a character in Moomin Summer Madness called Misabella that my husband always says, you are Misabella. Like, I'm so miserable about everything, but I still put one foot in front of the other. So he was like, the optimism comes from you putting one foot in front of the other, but you're generally a very miserable person. And I'm like, I'm quite happy with that characterization, because it is true. I do spot things. So Misabella, she's just like really grim about everything, but Moomins is the thing that brings me joy. And I have a dog named after Snufkin, because I think Snufkin's philosophy on life is magical. So yeah, Moomins.
Good start.
I love this Moomin content. I'm Little Mai, I think, by the way. If you had to be a Moomin character, who are you?
Yeah, we talked about this quite a lot. I don't feel like I'm any... I got a bit
That's what we do when we're not on the podcast.
I got a bit of Papa Moomin about me, but I'm not really...
Oh, Moomin Papa, interesting. Okay.
Yeah. But he's not messy enough.
Oh, okay.
Anyway, we can talk...
All right, yeah.
We can brainstorm afterwards. I need to think more deeply about it, because I don't feel like any of them quite fit me, and I'd like an identity.
Sorry to put you on the spot.
Maybe you could be a bog standard hatty fattener. You just go around vibrating.
Wow.
Going around vibrating is actually kind of my vibe, to be fair. That's pretty spot on. Julia, over to you.
What or who has recently inspired you?
Oh, well, I'm going to be political. The children of Gaza. So I have spent a lot of time obviously being exposed to the same things as other people, and I think a lot of it is absolutely horrific. But something that I've made a real habit of doing is following accounts where in Palestine there's been that real focus on the advocacy of play and how play exists even amidst genocide, that children will find ways to play. And I follow the journeys of different children, and just being able to see how play becomes like a mitigating factor to some of the adversity and trauma. So, and obviously I was nervous about sharing that one, but I think it's really important that we recognise that as well.
That's so beautiful. Here.
Play is transcendent, isn't it?
100%.
Therapy, in a way, I think.
I totally agree.
Play more.
It just shows how fundamental it is. I guess that even in that environment, it still happens. I totally agree. All right, if you opened your own early years setting, Kerry, what would you call it?
It would either be Snufkin's Place.
Yeah,
I like
perfect.
that.
Yeah, spot on.
Or Tiny Totoro's.
Or sorry, what did it say again?
Tiny Totoro's.
Ooh.
As in My Neighbour Totoro.
Yeah, nice.
Oh my
There's a theme emerging. There's a theme emerging already. You're going to get a copyright claim within the first 10 minutes of opening up, but otherwise it's a great idea.
What does a really good day look like for you?
Oh, a really good day is, and no offence to you as host, is not working. I do not live to work. But a really good day for me is getting up, going to the Lido. So I live 10 minutes away from a Lido, and it is just magical. So I go for a swim, and being in water is the only place, like being an autistic person with very heightened sensory perception, and being in water is the only place where my entire body feels at peace. So if I start my morning with a swim, I feel like that is my heaven. So going to the Lido, going for a walk with my 3 chihuahuas and my husband. We do a lot of walking with our doggies, but it's our time where we like process, and we're both autistic, so that's our special interest chat time. Eating safe food, so having spicy pasta. Anybody who knows me knows that I have spicy pasta about 3 or 4 times a week, and it brings me joy. I think safe foods are often talked about as though that they're not like interesting, but actually spicy pasta is my joy. And then anything that involves walking. So I am somebody that if there is an hour walk or a 10-minute public transport, I'll do the walk, because I just love looking at things. Like my eyeballs like absorb everything. So it's really mundane, my good day. If I was to say like my good mega day, it would just be to be in Japan at all times, walking around Japan. But on an average day at home, that's kind of the days that make me feel happy.
I didn't know that about the water. That's new to me. Is that something that's pretty common across a lot of people with autism, that being in water, or do you think it's just something that's specific to you?
I think it's just unique sensory profile. So I know of autistic people that absolutely, like, you can see their nervous system like crawling outside of itself at the thought of water. But for me, and actually I have another autistic friend that agrees, but it just, I think that lightness, I have heightened, what is referred to as heightened interoception, which means I feel every single sensation in my body in the most intense way. And there's something about getting into water that calms that interoception, where I'm not feeling everything. I just feel light, and it really, really helps my mental health. I should maybe do that cold water plunging or whatever it's called, but just a swim is good enough for me. So,
do you have a motto or a bit of advice that you live by?
So the motto that I live by, it actually comes from my dad. And when I was thinking about this question, I thought, I need something really profound. But I was like, no, the motto that I live by is you can't take it with you. And that is when my dad was alive. Like, he would always say that. And at the time, I thought it was like in relation to like money. Like, you can't take your money with you, suspend it. He was also like that. But I think in reality, what he was actually saying is like, you can't take yourself with you. You're like, this ends at some point, so just be yourself, speak up when you need to, like, just you can't take this with you. So what you do in the here and now really is important. And I kind of only reflected on that once he died, reflecting back on the way that he lived. And my husband always laughs at me because whenever I'm wanting to do something impulsive, I say, oh, I can't take it with me, so I'm going to buy this thing that I can't afford, or I can't take it with me, so I'm going to do this thing. Because life's too short to be boring, I think.
Everything is borrowed, as Mike Skinner said. I love that. Yeah.
Yeah. I love that. I think that is extremely profound.
Could be a Moomin episode, maybe.
It
about
could,
that.
it could.
Nice, love that. All right, let's dive into it. So, I guess where we wanted to start on the sort of meat of the episode, for want of a better word, is, you know, maybe if there's some people listening who super interested, but maybe at the start of their journey, maybe some young educators kind of at the start of their journey around understanding neurodiversity and disability-affirming practice. Could we talk maybe a little bit about terminology? Like, what in your mind do you think of when you what you mean by neurodivergent or neurotypical, for example?
So neurodiversity, I think, like, obviously it is a bit of a buzzword at the moment and everyone's kind of talking about it. And I think there can be this tendency to think that neurodiversity just refers to autistic people or those who have developmental differences. But neurodiversity is literally all of us. It's everyone. And it's the recognition that, like, us being different from one another is a biological and inevitable fact. And actually our differences from one another is what sustains humanity, because if we were all the same, we'd die. So it's like we need to be different from one another. But sadly, we live in a world where there is this emphasis that everybody needs to be striving to fit into this idea of normal. And those who don't fit into that idea are then subject to what is often referred to as pathologization. So like, oh, if you don't fit into the idea of normal, there must then be something wrong with you, and we need to fix or treat you, and we need to enforce you back into this idea of normal. And this starts in early childhood. We start with that messaging very early on that whilst you're a unique child, we're also going to measure you in some way at the end of the foundation stage, or we're still going to put you into interventions that encourage you to give eye contact or to sit still or whatever it might be, or to play properly. And so the work that I do is around trying to increase people's frameworks for thinking that actually there is no inherently inferior or superior way of being. We just are. We are just what we are. And it's about understanding ourselves holistically. And neurodiversity is also about recognizing that as humans, we're not immortal. Like, we are subject to needs, disabilities, illness. We might experience delays or impairments, but those don't make us less than other people. They are just part of the human experience. So neurodivergent is a term that is often used to describe those who diverge from the ideas of normal. People sometimes say, oh, it's because your brain and body it diverges. It's more about you diverge in the idea of normal, and you don't necessarily need a label for that. Neurotypical is not necessarily a term that I use. I use neurotypical conforming, because I don't think there is any such thing as a normal person. And I think even to say somebody is neurotypical, it now seems like we say that as an insult of like, oh, boring neurotypicals. And it's like, no, they are also part of a system of the expectation to be compliant to being normal. And I think a lot of people find out later on in their life that they're neurodivergent, even though they passed as neurotypical. So I use the term neurotypical conforming to say that's somebody that has or is more susceptible to striving to fit in or to follow the path of neuronormativity. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes total sense.
Oh, yes.
I think Julia was physically bouncing in her chair for most of that, so I think she's on board.
I'm doing that thing where I'm transcending from podcast participant to just... I mean, sorry, that was bad for the audio listeners, but yeah, I get so excited to just hear what people are saying that I forget that we're supposed to
do stuff.
Come in as well.
And on that topic, Kerry, like, you've talked in the past about not, like, consciously not describing yourself as a SEND consultant or in the area of SEND. Like, do you want to touch on that a little bit and why that language for you is maybe something that you're not comfortable with or you don't think is the right way of thinking about things?
Yeah, it's relatively complex, and I'm aware that Jamie Oliver's jumped on my bandwagon, has also been rejecting the term SEN recently.
Jamie
I was like, oh, now the celebrity has said it. There's been a lot of us advocates saying it for a while.
Jamie, get out of my DMs, mate. Come on.
Yeah,
I'm
but
on
well done, Jamie, for your dyslexia evolution. But he's right. So it's kind of complex, but like we all have needs, we have human needs. And I think when you create this binary category of like, oh, here are your normal children and here are your special children, you're still creating a segregated mindset that actually the special needs children are over here and here's our normal ones. And I think it's insulting. I think it is imprecise. If I go into a nursery setting and I say, how many children with SEN do you have? Because I've not got an issue with disability. Disability is a very valid term, but the term special educational needs, if I go into a setting and say, how many children with SEN do you have? It's so imprecise. It tells me nothing about those children. Whereas if I say, tell me about your children, what are their neurotypes? Do they have disabilities? Are they disabled? Like, tell me about that. And that's where you get the rich information. The other thing that makes me feel really uncomfortable is if we trace the history of the term SEN. The term SEN is an evolving term that actually was rooted in the term educationally subnormal, which is obviously a racist term. It talks about the segregation of Black Caribbean children in the 60s and 70s. So Black people being viewed as unteachable and then being segregated. So I think the racist history of it as well. I also think it's a classist term. I think we often see the term SEN applied to those who are under-resourced. I think we see the term SEN applied to children who are younger in a educational year. So summer-born children are more likely to be labelled as having SEN. And we know that then impacts their income, even their outcomes, and possibly their income.
Possibly their income. That was a good Freudian slip, that. I like it.
But we know it then impacts their outcomes. So SEN is not fit for purpose. And I feel very passionate about, we have to resist that term. We have to say, no, we are not going to describe our children in this way anymore. We're going to use terminology that is more humanising. And it's not all about language. I know sometimes people get a bit annoyed with me of like, as long as the practice is good, language turns into action. And I think the actions that we see in the SEN system are not good enough for our children.
I have a burning question. I feel like I've asked 3 questions in a row, and then I'm going to let Julia jump in. But I think you're so right about that idea of language turning into action. And with that in mind, if someone's listened to you there for the last couple of minutes, thought, you know what, I really agree with that. I kind of hate this idea of thinking of like my cohort of SEN children and how many SEN children do I have. Like, but at the same time, a need for a nursery of a certain size to have some sort of operational understanding at a high level of their different children and how to support them. Like, how do you turn that idea about language into practice? How should nurseries be thinking about making sure they can make accommodations to their different children in a sort of an operationally efficient way while not necessarily putting them in these easy, simple, and maybe not so helpful buckets?
So I don't think it's necessarily an easy, it's something that I am still trying to figure out myself. Like, what language am I reframing or replacing? I think that we can still describe support needs, we can describe developmental differences, we can talk about which developmental pathway a child might be on, and we can look at indicators over red flags. So you still absolutely need to capture the support needs a child has, but in capturing that, it doesn't need to dehumanize or suggest that the child having needs makes them less than other children. So, I think all language at the moment around developmental differences is imprecise. And I suppose I'm not dodging the question. I just think that it's something that collectively we need to think about. How do we take ownership of our language and describe things in a way that still get children what they need, but it does it through that strengths-led perspective? So a lot of the work I do in settings and with early years educators is around, would a reframe lead to a better quality of life and outcome? And in most cases, I find it does. It really does. And I was doing a training last night and I was talking about self-fulfilling prophecy. If you present a child as a problem, the child becomes a problem. So the reason and the motivation to shift our language is I don't want to look at children as problems. I want to look at them as possibilities. I want to embrace who they are right now in this moment. I want to know about their likes and dislikes. I want to know about their special interests. I want to know about their traits rather than always talking about their symptoms. So I think that reframe, it's building that self-efficacy of and the self-belief of that child. Does that make sense? Sorry, I asked that a lot about making sense.
No, that's good. I do exactly the same thing. What do I say all the time? Do you get it? Or do you know what I mean?
You know what I mean?
I like building a richer profile, I guess, is essentially like as seeking to build a richer profile of each child is essentially kind of the point, right? Like that's what we want to get
I
to.
love this idea of as well of building those foundations that allow you to have that nuanced appreciation of yourself as you get older, because in no way do we want to think of ourselves as just however we were viewed in primary school or early years or whatever, but having that rich tapestry of like, these are things I like, these are things I need, and these things are valid and appreciated and are recognized as part of my like tapestry of being. I appreciate maybe 4-year-olds aren't thinking quite as conceptually as that, but like
maybe
the
if they've watched
message is
Moving,
there,
they
right?
might be thinking about tapestry
you know
of
that
being.
the things you need and want are appreciated by people, and you will have those things you need, and that's an excellent foundation for navigating society as you get older.
And unconsciously, because I think that's a really important point, I think sometimes because of this concept of adultism that we, like, society doesn't seem to like children in the UK, I don't think. And so we almost like speak about them, we treat them, we do things to them as though that they're not autonomous beings with their own thoughts and feelings. And the thing that really sits with me, and again, probably drawn on my own childhood trauma of being labelled special needs as a child, but never getting the right support. What messages and what stories are we telling children in their earliest years, and how does that become their internalized voice? And it horrifies me, the stories that are being told to neurodivergent and disabled children, to the point where they then reject their differences. And I had a situation recently where a parent of a 16-year-old came and spoke to me, and she said, my son has just been diagnosed autistic, and he was disgusted. He was appalled by being referred to as autistic or having autism spectrum disorder. And I think she expected me to like be like, no, he needs to embrace it. And I was like, I totally understand. When I was 30 odd and I got my autism diagnosis, even though I sought it out, I felt shame, I felt embarrassment, I invalidated myself, because we've been told all these messages about what it is to be neurodivergent, and your voice sometimes outweighs. So if I'm an early years educator and I've got the privilege, because it is a privilege, to actually influence a child's understanding of themselves, I want to get that right. And I think those of us working in the SEN system, we need to really act with care, and I don't always see that, and it infuriates me.
I agree.
Yeah, totally agree. I guess, and to get a little more thinking on the ground and tactical for some of maybe the leaders out there, if they're looking at their nursery space, I think we sometimes have this idea of like, oh, well, we have like the typical nursery space, and then we have this like adjusted nursery space for various either, you know, neurodivergent, again in air quotes here, children or less able-bodied children. Like, how do you think about challenging that idea that there's kind of a default way to be, and how do we bring that into thinking about our physical environment in nurseries, and how should we approach a sort of an audit of our physical environments as someone who maybe wants to create a more inclusive place for the children in our care?
I suppose the first thing I would say is don't view your environment as an audit type space, because I think that then leads us down this like, oh, if we tick all these boxes, then we're gonna meet the needs. And I'm not saying don't assess, don't review, but I think like term audit, I've done that before, where I've given an audit to someone and I'm like, do all this and then you're gonna like be able to meet the needs of all children. Humans are complex and messy and chaotic and weird, and including our children. Our children are weird, and weird isn't a bad thing. So we've got to go through that sense making process for every child, I think, and our environment then naturally evolves, and we're not always going to get it right. But what I often will speak to early educators about is I think that early educators get blamed for a lot of stuff, like, oh, you're not inclusive enough, or you denied this child a place here because you said you can't meet their needs. And I think a lot of criticism gets thrown at them. But what I think we need to look at is the history. Our education system is built on place-based inclusion, which is the idea that as long as they're in the space, big tick, you're inclusive. And then early years educator goes, well, I've got 4 autistic children, 2 emerging ADHD, 1 with developmental language difference, a child who's Down syndrome. They're here. How the heck do I support them? And so when you've got settings that get to the point of saying, I can't meet that child's needs here, it's not that the educator is failing to be inclusive. I think it's an educator recognizing I've not been equipped in this area, and that is on a systemic issue. It really, really angers me when early years educators get all this criticism leveled at them or get gaslit. Like, I've really been reading a lot recently about professional gaslighting. So this idea that, oh, what you do for one child will work for all children. No, that's not the case at all. Different children need different things. So when I'm in an environment, what I try to focus on over auditing is thinking about your current cohort, but thinking about your environment as a third teacher, as a third co-regulator, but really thinking about responsive and attuned development of your environment. So if a child, for example, is dysregulated or has a meltdown, in that moment, you might not have had the intel or the knowledge to know how to support that still gives you intel to think, okay, do I need rest spaces in my environment? Is there enough spaces for children to go if they need to retreat? So I do think it's okay that our environments can evolve based on what we're seeing. This idea that we can just set them up at the beginning of the year and go, right, we're ready for inclusion. Actually, inclusion is meant to be a messy process. And I always use that quote from Kathy Nutt-Brown: inclusion is a process of becoming, not being. So I think it comes through professional dialogue. I think it comes through early attunement. I think it comes from going to specialists or advocates that are offering alternatives to this idea that, you know, a little bit of inclusion or one size fits all. It just doesn't. I know that's not like a straightforward answer because people want tangible stuff, but I just don't think can be prescriptive.
No, I like the thought about becoming is a very good one, that you're never done. I think that's like a very good way of thinking about it, because people want to be like, oh, I'm done now. Oh, my environment is so inclusive. Thank God now I can focus on the next thing, and it's just not how it works.
But conversely to that, I think it's quite liberating.
Agreed.
Like you were talking there about the pressure on early years educators for perfection, and I think having this idea that like you can't possibly be perfect all the time. You can do your best. You can take the advice of you, as you've suggested. You can do your best to adapt for the cohort that you have. But this idea that it is becoming rather than like, oh, thank God we're inclusive now. Whew, like that's quite liberating.
And finally, I think the idea that definitely is also when you said, it really struck a chord with me when you said, well, to say I'm not equipped to deal with this is the right answer. Because I think the point being, what is the opposite? That you sort of are knowingly unequipped and then try to do it anyway. That's not the answer either. Like, sort of people quietly knowing that they're not quite serving the needs of that child. I think a lot of that happens, whereas it's brave to stand up and say, I'm not able to handle this and I need help.
And that comes from an early years educator, that thinking. So everything I know, all my specialisms or expertise come from early educators, like conversations. And I remember, who I'm now working with again, a nursery manager years ago, and she said, if I offer this place to this child, I'm going to traumatize this child, because, not intentionally, but because I know that this child needs something different from what my environment offers. And what she did in that moment, and I thought it was a really important conversation, that she was like, we know that neurodivergent children can be more vulnerable to trauma, particularly thinking about sensory perception, be it in environments that have not necessarily been developed with you in mind. And she said her nursery at the time was in like a house, so 2 up, 2 down. It was quite kind of squashed, and they've made the best of the environment. But she was like, this is an autistic child that is movement driven, that has got high energy states, that needs to feel like his curriculum from his tips to his toes, which we should offer that to all children. But she was like, the salience of the amount of movement he needs. And what she did is she said to the parent and carers, she said, I don't think that this is the right environment for your child right now, but actually I know a nursery down the road that has a forest school. They have an outdoor space.
I was going to say, it sounds like that child needs a forest school. That was the first thing that came to me, yeah.
But she went on the visit with this parent. She did a transition, even though the child had never started at the setting. And for me, it was because I was one of those consultants of like, you know, I've gone through that period of being judgy of like excluding children, not meeting children's needs. And I realised actually I'm not listening to people's stories. I'm not giving them a chance to actually share their reflections. And here, this particular setting, their inclusive practice is, or their commitment to inclusion is absolutely unparalleled. But will she be pushed into professional gaslighting of we must accept all children, even though we don't have good enough professional development? The professional development we do have is still ableist and focuses on upholding a SEN system. We don't get paid enough. We don't have enough funding. We have to jump through millions of hoops just to get a bit of inclusion funding. And it's like, no, enough is enough. Sorry, I get really angry about it.
Not at all. No need to apologise. It's a great point. I totally agree. All right, Julia, what is the word from the sponsor this week?
Well, it's family, like it always is.
Family?
Yes.
As in a group of people bonded by love, marriage, or adoption?
No, that's family. You're thinking of the force that pulls people towards the centre of the earth.
No, that's gravity. You're thinking of calamity.
No, that's when something really bad happens. You're thinking one of those awnings that provides shade.
No, Julia, that's a canopy. You're thinking of that creature that lives under the sea, kind of looks like a seal.
No, that's a manatee. You're thinking of the early childhood platform.
Oh, family.
Family. Oh, those group of people who are united by blood, marriage, or adoption.
No, that's family. Julia, you've got a little concept for us.
Yes. So, I would love it if we could talk a little bit about S.H.A.R.E goals.
Sure.
Sorry. So,
Sure.
instead of a usual SMART goal that possibly most of our listeners will have heard of, I would love to talk a little bit about S.H.A.R.E goals, especially in regards to the Tiny Chair podcast. So,
Time for some feedback.
It's time for some improvement. So, if we were looking at setting some S.H.A.R.E goals, now this is, and again, Kerry, please correct me if I'm wrong, specific, holistic, adaptable, recognises and affirms identity, and raises well-being and engagement. Is that right?
I don't think so, but you're putting me through my paces here. So it's strengths-led. Oh my God, I can't even remember my own share. So it's share as in I share something with you.
Oh,
shit, I had it as S.H.A.R.E.
Yeah.
Unbelievable.
Is letting us down again, Julia.
This is appalling.
Share as in I'm sharing. So we got strengths.
Strengths-led, holistic, autonomy-building,
Okay.
recognises intersectional identities, and engagement and well-being focus.
There we go. Okay.
Nice.
Thank goodness she was here.
Gosh, I'm sweating trying to remember
That was
my own
good.
acronym.
Thank you for sharing that with us, Kerry. I appreciate it. All right, so we've got to try and do this.
Yeah.
And this is something, Kerry, that you do with settings from time to time, for example, thinking about setting goals specifically for children or for the setting as a whole or for staff improvement?
S.H.A.R.E goals are mostly aimed at supporting neurodivergent and or disabled children, but I see no reason why you might not apply those to other scenarios and situations.
Okay, so our podcast needs some help.
Yeah. So if we wanted to have a specific...
Well, no, strength-based.
Strength-based.
Strengths-led.
Strengths-led. Oh, my
Well, now we have to
goodness.
talk about our strengths.
I think our strengths are we talk a lot. We're
Talk
good,
a
we're
lot.
good at talking, so we should focus
Could do
on
talking. A lack of... There's never any silence.
maybe more silence. Well, silence in a podcast.
Strengths-led.
That's worse.
Okay.
So if we holistic, that means... in fact, Kerry, tell us how we would consider it holistically. How would a goal be holistic?
So a goal that's holistic is recognising the different contextual factors that will influence that child's developmental experiences. So to give you an example of a non-holistic goal, when I first started as an early years educator, an occupational therapist came in and said, I need you to have a SMART goal where you thread 3 beads 3 times a day, 5 days a week, over 6 weeks. And when the child has done that, we can say that they've developed their fine motor skills. And it was the most boring 6 weeks of mine and the child's life, because I kept taking them off and being like, thread the beads. And so that's what would be an isolated or a too specific goal. So a holistic is where you recognize like what's relevant and meaningful to this child. So what are their interests? Where do I find them in the setting? What are their experiences within and beyond the setting? So that when you're actually formulating the goal, you're making sure that it is like, rather than integrating the child, you're integrating the goal into everyday experiences. So So for that particular child, had I have had the common sense at the time, I would have been like, well, actually, I know that this child absolutely loves Play-Doh. So I'm going to integrate that goal into like developing fine motor with some, like party Play-Doh or doing scented Play-Doh or using provocational tools. But at the time, I suppose in my mind, I was like, well, an occupational therapist has come in and said I've got to do it, and they're the authority, and I'm just an early years educator. So, and then I felt very good when I was able to tick off at the end of the 6 weeks. I'm part of why that child is now able to use their fingers. And it was like, but the child absolutely never wants to look at beads or threading ever again.
And you too also were not wanting to look at beads or threading for a while, I imagine.
I mean, I'm interrupting my own segment, but I wanted to touch on something you said there about, and you've mentioned it actually a few times, about the things that you didn't know in your practice years ago, or things that you did and now you know that, you could have done it differently or whatever. And I think there's so many educators or anyone in the sector actually who can relate to the same thing. And I know that actually you and I have had this conversation around Gestalt language processing, where now I know what that is, but I think so often about the children who I was working with years ago who were using Gestalt or Gestalt expressions, and I didn't know they would communicate it, and these are things that obviously as educators, when we learn, we reflect on. But it's not a bad thing per se, and I think we gain so much when we can reflect in that way. We learn something new and we're like, oh my gosh, now I know, like now I can do better. I can support children better. And the example with the beads there, that's boring. And often as educators, we don't feel like we can stand up to someone of authority. And I think, giving the educators listening that strength, that window into like, you can say, why are we doing this? Or you can question an occupational
can we do this
therapist
in a different way or
a speech therapist, whatever. You have the power to do that. So there's something really powerful there, I think.
And or like I do so much work with early years educators where I'm like, trust in your knowledge of the child. You are with this child 10 hours a day, 5 days a week. You might not have the snazzy words or the theoretical backdrop, but I'll often pick up early years educators' paperwork, and we all know early years educators hate paperwork. It's not why any of us really went into childcare, is to do lengthy paperwork, though we know it's necessary. Documentation is absolutely necessary, whether that be digital or paper form. But I often go in and I'm like, the educator doesn't quite know how to convey this on paper. But when you actually have a conversation with an early years educator, it's absolutely wild, the intrinsic and like intricate knowledge they have about children, often like really random stuff, and that they will often then undermine themselves and go, oh, well, that's not important. And it's like, your intricate knowledge of children is important. And I always use the example of the banana on the table, because it really made me laugh at the time, of this key person saying, I went off on holiday. I was supporting a neurodivergent child, and I, spend so much time with this child. I know everything about them, but they then went on holiday, and the educators at the setting were getting really stressed because the child was having like regular like meltdowns and getting really upset and really sad. And so they ended up ringing this educator and saying, we think he's experiencing real separation anxiety, like he's really struggling, and is there anything you can advise us? And it's particularly at snack time that he's having difficulties. And this educator just went, did you put a banana on the centre of the table? And they were like, no. And she was like, oh, he loves a banana on the centre of the table. And so it was like, okay. And then when we had a conversation about it, it was like, oh, they eat round the table and they have a fruit bowl and he loves bananas. And it makes them feel like that's reminiscent of home. And it's totally random. But I was like, I suppose at the time, I was like, oh, I really relate to that, because as humans, we all have things that ground us and make us feel safe. But for her, she was like, oh, why would I tell anybody about the banana on the table? Because it's not important. But it is. These intricate things are important. So bananas on the table.
What's your banana on the table, Julia?
What, my personal one, or the ones that the banana on the tables we have at home?
Banana on the table?
Oh, crumbs. My personal banana on the table. Do you know what? I think it is when I come to work, I have a very specific kind of train routine, if you will. So I have to sit. I like to face away from the direction of travel, because usually the sun comes through the window.
That makes me sick.
Yeah, I don't like the sun to to be facing me. So I go backwards. I have my backpack on my lap, and then I have all of my makeup in the little front flap of my backpack. And so I have my mirror up like this, and then I sit and do my makeup on the train. And if I can't do that, I feel I don't feel like I've prepared for the day. So that's definitely my banana on the table,
nice.
I think. That's my it's my little...
Mine's like morning coffee and a little read of whatever it is that I'm reading.
Oh, nice.
That's my banana on the table. I'll be saying goodbye to that, I think, when my little one is born. I don't think you get to do that anymore. Do you have a banana? Is the spicy pasta your banana on the table, Kerry?
I suppose, I would say my thing that makes me feel grounded is my meal routine. And thankfully, I am married to an autistic person that respects that, like, my meals have to follow a certain pattern and they have to taste the same. So I think my husband, if he's ever considered divorcing me, he has said the way you get dysregulated if I use a different brand or if there is a different flavour. And I remember once he decided to be a little bit novel, and it delivered me what could only be described as prison gruel. And he'd given me this, it looked like mash. It looked like mash, but it wasn't mash. So I took a big thing, because I love mash, and I was like, what is this? And that happened a couple of years ago, and still I'm like, if you ever feed me prison gruel ever again, like that, I don't know what the food was called. So me having my meal routines is very, very, safe foods are very important to me, and I don't like to deviate. So
interesting, really good to know.
Yeah.
We just to finish off this share goal segment before we close out, because I think we're not going to get a share goal for the podcast. There's no room for improvement. I don't think. Clearly, that's what it is. But we have strength-led, holistic. The A stands for
autonomy-building. So moving on from this idea that all children, and it comes back to your point earlier on, actually, around we seem to sometimes see in early childhood, we've got to get children ready for the real world. And it's like, well, we could change that real world, because currently it's pretty horrible. And the other thing that we see is this idea of they've just got to be independent. But as humans, we're not independent. We are interdependent. We rely on our communities and our networks. So what we should be supporting with our young children is autonomy building. So teaching them how to communicate in their preferred mode, their likes, their dislikes, their wants, their needs, teaching them how to advocate and stand up for themselves. I always remember a child that I supported years ago, and this is when I was back in Liverpool, so it sounded even better. But I remember being in a situation where a teacher was speaking to a child, and the teacher was speaking to the child awfully, and the child turned around and went, "Who are you talking to?" And the child then got shouted at. But when I spoke to the teacher afterwards, I was like, he was right to advocate for himself. He was speaking to him terribly, so he stood up for himself. So autonomy is about usualizing it's okay for our children to have needs and to communicate those.
Love that. And then we have recognizing and affirming intersectional identity, and then which is about, of course, including the history and the cultural heritage of the child in front of you, right?
Yeah, it's just that simple thing that we sometimes label a child as SEN. And we're like, but what are the other influencing identity markers that might exacerbate or escalate discrimination? Or where do we need to think about privilege, or where that child might have greater access? So thinking about intersectional identities, including the funds of knowledge and the cultural insights of that child and family, I think is really important. We can't just think about SEN.
And then engaging well-being as part of that. That's the kind of final piece of the puzzle, right?
I wanted to go into that a little bit, because you mentioned about being under-resourced and how some families, some areas, some children are going to come from backgrounds that are under-resourced, and that's then not fair to be like, well, there's something wrong with you. Yeah. It's like, well, if you don't have the same access to opportunity, then how is that a reasonable judgment? Of course it's not.
Well, I like that. Share goals. I'm going to start using those. Yep. Not to evaluate the podcast, because clearly that's too hard for us. But I guess it must just be because it's perfect as it is.
That's it. That's why.
We want to finish off with a few more questions about some of your current work.
Yes.
Kerry, you've been doing some really interesting stuff recently as part of your doctorate, I know. Speaking a little bit about play patterns in specific with autistic children, I think calls back to the start of the podcast where we were talking about one of your Icks, the kind of concept that every child develops along some predisposed developmental pathway, and all your job is to gently push them in the one direction that it is possible to move in. But you can tell us a little bit about that for someone who's not heard about play patterns before and what you're thinking about when it comes to those.
Yeah, so just to obviously credit, play patterns originates with a researcher called Carmel Khan, who is one of few researchers that has been exploring autistic play, even though autistic play itself and as a research focus is increasing, but we do need to see that translate into other neurotypes and disabilities. However, it's a great framework. And I'd read it in an article where she talked about something that we're all very aware of is that historically the way autistic children play has been pathologized and often used as a way of intervening and correcting and fixing and normalizing autistic children. The really obvious example is all this child does is line things up, or all this child does is fleet between different areas, or this child requires a certain level of repetition or predictability in their play. And we see that as like a potentially negative thing, and then we apply these labels to children that play doesn't come naturally to them, that they can't play functionally, appropriately, normally, purposefully. And so historically, and again, this was how I was trained, and I would often talk about this idea that play doesn't come naturally to autistic children and we need to teach them how to play. But what I was then seeing in practice is that when I was around autistic children, and then when I thought about my own autistic childhood and adulthood and the way that I play, I was like, oh, autistic children absolutely know how to play. It's an innate part of all of us. It's that we do not necessarily diversify and explore the different patterns that might emerge based on your neurotype and or your disability. And so Carmel Khan did this really interesting thing where she actually interviewed autistic adults and asked them to talk about their play patterns as children. And it was a really emotional read, because, you know, when you're like, oh, all the things that I was mocked for as a child, they are okay. It's okay to have a special interest. It's okay to engage in repetitive play. It's okay for you to be absolutely driven by sensorial experiences or sensory highs. So play patterns is something that I have then kind of expanded upon in recent years, where I'm trying to help educators, rather than to look at play as something to be fixed, it's something to be understood, and that we can be the knowledge creators alongside our children for creating infinite, because there are infinite patterns of play. We just don't know about them all. And so we've got to move away from this idea of like children seamlessly move through play stages and actually recognize play as chaotic and messy. And it's something that can't be and shouldn't be defined.
I love that. Oh, the other thing I really wanted to ask about is you mentioned in one of your courses about unpicking how play has been appropriated for learning and development. And I would love to kind of talk a bit about that. Like, what do you mean? How can we liberate play?
I feel like this has been like a difficult one for me, because I've always been really wedded to the idea of like play is learning is play, and children learn through play, and that's how they make sense of the world. And I don't dispute that to a degree. But when I was trained and when I qualified, it felt to me, when I reflect back, that it was like, right, we know something all children do is that they play. So we can use that to direct and lead and guide play towards these predefined neuro-normative goals so that they're school ready. And it almost feels like policymakers were like, let's use play for our own advantage. And we get to define what is play. We get to say what play is acceptable and what play is not. We get to make the decision about how it links to learning. And I got to a point where I was like, where have we got so lost in this world that play has to be learning? Because for a lot of us as adults, if we think about our play patterns as adults, play, yes, is sometimes learning, but play is sometimes about regulation. Play is sometimes about not learning. It's about switching off. Play is about processing, which you could still say, oh, that's still learning. But I feel like when you say that learning through play is the priority, what you're saying is, oh, only the play that we accept, and play that doesn't fit into our agenda is play that's then not valued, which again, not only stigmatizes neurodivergent children, but we also see that that kind of discrimination towards Black children and how they play. We see this like pathologization of, like, I remember having a conversation with somebody and they said if a white child is playing boisterously, it will be called energetic and active. If it's a black child, it will be called aggressive. And so we see basically play being sanitized, and unless you can say, oh, I can see this play and this links to this area of learning and this is going to be the potential outcome, then it's kind of thrown away. Whereas I don't know about you two if you've had similar experiences, but I watch children play sometimes and I'm like, I've got no idea what's happening here, but I can see the traits of intrinsic motivation. So,
Yes.
and that's why I talked earlier on about being weird. Children play in really weird ways. I remember I definitely played in weird ways, and it doesn't have to make sense for it to have value. But I feel like so much of play is thrown out in the bin if it's like, well, I can't link that to an area of learning and development.
Yes.
And it's like, maybe we need to be a bit more expansive and a bit more ambitious.
It's such a good point. It's like looking at, if just because I can't explain what's going on does not mean it's not. Like, and I think it's for educators to reflect on that idea of, can I see that there is something deeply intentional about what's going on? And I remember Sue Allingham told me about this once. Like, a child was drawing what was obviously a robot, and she went in and asked, I can't remember exactly what it was, but something like, well, where's the robot off to, or whatever it was. And the child looked at her like, what a ridiculous question, like, I'm busy here, go away, kind of thing. And I think there's something so much about that idea of, like, if there's intention in it, there's also a degree of the job is to let them be and let them go through that play experience because something's going on that's important.
Yeah, and that's why I think, particularly with neurodivergent children, parallel play is so, so important to be like, because again, I sometimes see adults being given the advice of like, if a child's playing, and because we have to be seen interacting 100% of the time, get down at the child's level, look deeply into their eyes, ask them a loads of questions about what they're doing. And we might talk about open-ended questioning, but I think for a neurodivergent child, that is so invasive, that is so overwhelming, that is so like disruptive. Whereas I now have gotten into that habit of like, I'm just going to be in proximity to you, I'm going to sit alongside, we might do a bit of body doubling, we might have a shared experience, you might do a bit of penguin pebbling once you trust me, so you might initiate interaction with me by kind of moving a car over to be like, okay, you can come in. So I often think about like, how do we loop in to children's play in a way that's respectful rather than just going over? And I think all early educators have this conversation around, we need to stop asking children about how many, what number, what colour, and actually just sit in their worlds and do that like gentle, often non-spoken attunement. Because you're right. I remember as a kid thinking lots of unsavory words about adults when they came over to my play, and it's go away. Like, I'm in this. I'm in my like flow state. I don't need you interrupting. But we are encouraged to interrupt and then call it interaction.
That's such a wonderful place to finish up on.
Do we have to finish?
I'm so sorry, partly because I'm concerned about Kerry overheating to the point of combustion over there in the UK. But before we finish, we definitely want to get a plug out of you. And then before we get the plug, while you're thinking about the plug in the back of your head, what it is that you want to plug right now, I am using my privileged position as somebody who gets to interview world-leading experts on play and children, and my current situation, which is that I'm about to become a dad for the first time, to a new section which we're calling Matt's Dadvice, where I want to hear your advice as a new dad. What should I be thinking about? Knowing that the main piece of advice that people have given me so far is do not listen to other people's advice. So that's as spoken. But I'm interested, if you have any advice for me, Kerry, as a new dad, what are some of the things I should be thinking about with my little one to be?
That's a terrifying question because I'm not a parent. So I'm thinking, like, who am I to give advice around parenting? But I suppose, like, similar to what other people have said, it's like trusting your instinct, like in the sense of, there is so much noise and surveillance and judgment of parents. And I think as long as you wake up every day and think everything I do will be in the best interests of the child, and sometimes that might not always look the best way, it might not always go right, but I think like trusting your instinct and that the only person who can measure the quality of a parent is the person at the receiving end. So I think like a lot of parents get so much like outside judgment, but actually really trusting that like inner experience that you're having. But I'm saying that as not a parent, so I
love it. That is great advice, Kerry. Thank you so much.
I would echo that. Yeah.
Yeah,
I think that's right.
Is she right? You don't disagree?
I think you. But the most poignant part there, I think, was that it only will be your child who can let you know how you're doing. So
very easy to get into that like comparing. Oh, my kid's doing this and your kid's not doing that.
But also, I think the other bit of advice to that then is, and it's weird, I always speak to my own parent and the one that was alive when he was, is like, I remember my dad used to, because I would always be like, I had a terrible childhood and you did this and you did that. And he was like, everyone messes up the children, it's fine. And what he meant by that is, like, parenting is not a perfect practice. The children are going to be exposed to things in the way that we parent. And I suppose for me, one of the biggest things that I learned as a child is, as an adult, but when I reflected on being a child of someone, is your parents are doing these things for the first time as well. So you've got to be compassionate. And my parents didn't always get it right, but I feel so much compassion that at least they tried and did their best. And I think they did an all right job. An all right job is fine. You don't need to be perfect.
I'd say they did an all right job. Looking at you now, Kerry.
Yeah, mostly.
You're doing pretty good. Go on then, tell us where can people find out more about if they were like, well, that's the most instructive hour of my life. I want to hear more from this person every single day. Where can they find more about you, Kerry?
So I am recently pivoting from my freelance role, and I have started leading a project called the Neurodiversity-affirming Early Childhood Collective. A bit of a tongue twister, but we need it all in there. And it is I'm developing a working group where we are developing diverse child development guidance called the Diverse Pathways of Development.
Whoa,
so
cool.
I've got a new website with the working group. I'm leading on that project. I've got a new email, and it's basically diversepathways.org. So I have deceased DYFS for me, which was my previous kind of username, but I'm now moving fully into this project around trying to create diverse pathways of development for different neurotypes and disabilities, so that we move from a deficit-based perspective to a holistic and more neutral understanding of what it is to be, for example, an autistic child. So that's kind of the work that I'm doing.
Love it.
I love it.
We'll link that in the description below. I'm going to be following
what I
that
was about
along
to say.
very carefully. That sounds wicked.
And it launches in October with training
Amazing.
and resources.
Keep an eye on it.
We will be keeping an eye out. Nothing like a deadline. Huh, Kerry?
I'm not good with a deadline, but I've had to set it because now I'm part of a collective. It's like, I actually have to do stuff. I can't just like aimlessly, not do
It's
stuff.
to your constant annoyment that other people need stuff from you, isn't it? I feel the same way. I'm like, it'd be so much easier if I was just by myself doing this. Thank you so much, Kerry. That's been absolutely wonderful.
Yeah, I could have talked for hours. I
yes.
can't believe we don't have the whole day in the studio, although I'm sure you're melting.
Well, thank you for inviting me.
No worries. Thank you for being on, Kerry, and we'll see you very soon. Bye.
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 Whoa, Nelly, what a podcast.
What a podcast. And what exclamation to finish the podcast. Whoa, Nelly, that might be my favourite one yet.
I'm so energised and excited.
It was a good one, wasn't it? What was the thing you sort of learned or enjoyed the most about the chat, Julia?
Oh, crumbs. Do you know what? I just found so much of what she said so affirming. And I love Kerry's ability to reflect on the things that she's learned and very humbly kind of explain how you can improve and you can develop in your practice, and there's no shame in that. Yeah. And I love that.
I thought it's so lovely that so many of the lessons that she shares are like, I did this and now I look back and think, oof, gosh, that was bad. It's a good format to sort of make sure that people are aware that we're just all improving and we're all on a path of becoming.
We're on a path of becoming. That's so right.
So as we talked about at the start of the podcast, we are off for a few weeks. We're taking a little mini break, not together, but not like a podcast mini break together. No. That'd be weird. But we are taking a little mini break. And so we'll be back around August time with episode number 9. But do not fear, we will be back. You'll just be without us for a few weeks. And I'm sure you have plenty to get up to yourself in the meantime as well.
I think so.
And if you want to get in touch, as ever, send us an email, drop us a DM on the Instagram. And also, please do leave us a review or just share us with someone who you like and who you think will like this. really helps us grow the channel.
It does indeed. I think that was a lovely sign off.
Pretty much it. We'll see you in a few weeks.
We'll see you in a few weeks.
Bye.
Bye.